Shikhar said, if you are not up always in for the office, then you get redundant.
I welcome you all. Good evening in this this discussion on data sovereignty, especially when we all understand that post-COVID there would be a new world order which we would be witnessing. Probably a change in the entire geopolitical space. We are already witnessing that there is a sentiment which is going against China, because people believe that they were not transparent enough to provide the data about the COVID's outbreak as well as the spread. And later on, they also used their influence in dealing with the WHO. This is the sentiment. Nobody has a proof that whether this virus originated from China or not. But the sentiment is that it originated in China, and they didn't provided the information, and their frequent events and their dealing of this pandemic also created more sentiments against China. But we also are seeing that the biggest victim of this pandemic is the US, the world's most powerful economy. How much the impact would be on their economy, that has to be seen in the future quarters. When their big corporations results would start coming in, and we'll be able to ascertain what sort of damage it has already done to the economy. But to this issue specific data, we all understand that these two are the two polars which derive the data's war for data. When we see towards China, there is a opaqueness. We all understand that, and there are apps which are prevalent in India. We understand that they take 45 to 55% more data than we all believe that which is required for functioning of those apps, especially ByteDance products, Hello, as well as TikTok. Then we also don't know what they do with the data, and who actually derive their data policy, whether it is a PLA or the government. So there are suspicions related to how China deals with data, but we are equally worried about what Americans does with data. We have already seen that Facebook is giving statements like that these are not infinite commodities. These type of statements came from their senior official Nick Clegg recently when he was countering India's position on data sovereignty and data's their right to protect data. Then we also have seen that in last 2 years we ourselves are not been able to develop consensus on the legislature which is required to protect our data. Then we have seen that RBI takes one stand and our negotiators take a different stand when RCEP negotiations were going on. RBI clearly says that financial statistics, they can't go out of the geographical limits. But our negotiators in RCEP, they surrendered, our right. So, what sort of national strategy should be there? There has to be a coherence. What should be that? Then the biggest argument which comes against India is that, which Facebook also mentioned in their counter, is that we don't have the capability of processing and storing that much of data. And what would we do with that data? But like the other panelists, they will be able to give more counter to these arguments. Then, in recent times, we have also seen that, there are three big developments in this COVID lockdown time. One is that e-commerce companies, they want to get into business back again. They see that post-COVID, people would be staying away from malls and marketplaces and from the shopping complexes, and they might get more traffic. This I get the sense when I talk to these players. Second big development is that India's biggest trader organization, Kate, they decided to float their own e-commerce platform where their retailers would be able to use those digital platforms and give us those essential and non-essential products. And the third, which is uh, which is actually uh, created a furor in the market, is the Reliance Facebook deal. This is a very interesting deal that Reliance JioMart, they have database of a large chunk of retailers, and Facebook, they have a capability, they have processing understanding, plus they also want to take this data out. Okay, so we right now don't have laws which can protect many of those data points. Then these three elements makes us more curious about what should be the country's strategy. Up now, there's another challenge which we have, which Smita ji and Raj Chandrasekhar ji, they are contemplating for a time being, that we should have a capability of manufacturing our equipments inside India. We had a long discussion that whether Huawei, ZTE, they should be allowed to get into our 5G plans or not, or should we look for Siemens and other American players for this thing. But I remember Smitaji telling me that there are Indian players who are ready with 5G like products, but they don't get into the system because of the inefficiencies in our system. And probably the decision making and the procedures are so complicated that they stay out of it, or they are not allowed to get into this. So now we all have stayed inside our living apartments for more than living complexes for more than a month, to introspect and to think through that what should be country's plan, what should be our plan to safeguard not only data but also create an ecosystem which helps us to position India as a superpower. We have this opportunity. There is no doubt. Most of the global experts are telling us that this opportunity is there for India. But are we ready for that opportunity to be leveraged, or we require some tweaking and some overhauling in our system to understand, my hypothesis or my limited understanding of the subject. I have with me, one of the best panels around. Jayadev Ranade, he retired as additional secretary in cabinet secretariat, worked extensively on China, and probably he's one of the best minds this country has produced to understand the Chinese and Chinese mindset. Then we also have with us Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia ji. He retired as country's DGMO and understands the strategic requirement of data and the paraphernalia which is required to safeguard it. Then we have with us R. Chandrasekhar ji. R. Chandrasekhar ji was country's telecom secretary, IT secretary. Both these ministries are critical, in this fight. And he also headed NASCOM. So NASCOM, we all understand that is a conglomerate of it's an association of best of the best IT companies. Then we have Ms. Smita Purushottam. Ms. Smita Purushottam retired as India's ambassador in Switzerland and was part of many trade negotiations, and is one of brilliant minds. And she regularly interacts with us, has a gut for developing an indigenous capacity for manufacturers. She these days run a think tank called Sitara, which is focused on developing these type of minds. Plus, we also have good people in audience, so I'm sure they would be asking you many questions once they hear you. To begin with, we'll give 3 to 4 minutes to each of the speakers so that they can make their remarks. and then we'll start building up the conversation. So may I request Mr. Ranade to start, and he make the initial comments. Till then, I'll request everybody to mute their mic so that we can hear Mr. Ranade out. Thank you very much. Mr. Ranade, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Arish. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me to this forum and the discussion. What I intend to do is I will pick up a couple of points from your introductory remarks, and I'll start with what you mentioned about 5G and our capacity there. I'd written a couple of papers also on this, and my understanding from whatever I have learned from different channels, and I think Mr. Chandrasekhar may be able to supplement that, is that we have a capability for developing our own 5G. Perhaps it might take 2 years to 3 years at the most, by which we can have it. And that much time, I think, is quite acceptable for India. We don't have automated, shall I say, unmanned cars on the near horizon, or, we're not going to run our homes with Alexi, etc. right away. So I think 5G capacity we do have, and we can do it. However, this is where we talk about indigenous hardware capability. And this is something many of us have been talking about for quite a while, flagging it. And maybe now, with the COVID having hit us and we're looking at the post-COVID phase, it acquires some urgency. We need to have certain basic things in place, like chips, like wafers, etc. We could have done it. We have allowed some of our capacity to just fade away. We have a couple of companies which can still do it, but for some reason, and I don't blame them because they obviously need demand, we are not going in for those demands. So we have to undertake complicated procedures to ensure that at least for the defense industry, where we did lay down some pretty strict guidelines as to which kind of materials could be used or not, we have to put them through a lot of forensics. So that's just one point I'd like to say, that 5G is something we can do. I think the government needs to do. And if I can be frank and candid on this in this discussion, I don't think it is just a question of bureaucratic procedures that is keeping our players out. I think it's also a question of the big boys playing their games and keeping our people out. The second thing is, the point that you made is, what do the people do with the data that is coming in? You referred to the Chinese. So again, here I'll make just a couple of brief points. The first is that data is vital for people who are developing or who are well on the way as far as artificial intelligence is concerned. And the Chinese are into that in a huge way. 2/3 of their budgeting for cyber, for these new technologies, are kept for the People's Liberation Army and them to benefit from it. I have the figures with me. I'm not going to bore you with that, but that is the kind of amount of money that they're putting in. The artificial intelligence they're already using, for prototypes, if I may call it, though they don't say that. They say it's already in use. They have developed some kind of armored personnel carriers. They've developed some kind of howitzers and tested them out in Tibet, again, unmanned, using AI. Now, these are things that we need to be conscious of. So when we use things like, I don't know what the new technologies are, like Paytm, this, that, and the other, all the data is being fed in there. And make no mistake, every single app that is used in India or elsewhere, like TikTok, etc., their servers are with the Public Security Bureau inside China. That's where the data is stored. So they can use it for what they like. We will not know. But since China is looking at other countries, and we are certainly not among the friendly ones, as to how to deal with that, AI is going to play a major role there. So I'll just conclude with these remarks. I'll say that as far as we are concerned, we have to look at these capacities. We need to build them up. And the final point is data sovereignty or cyber security, both being combined. I think it's absolutely valid for us as one of the biggest consumers of these technologies, including your Facebook, etc., to insist that the data is stored within India, that Indian laws govern the use of that data, and that is not allowed to go out. We will not have, therefore, if that is done, a repeat of the kind of thing that is going on with Twitter, where I see that one of our panelists has also been targeted by them, along with Mr. Hegde, the MP. They have to be sensitive to what we say as a government, much as they are sensitive to what other countries say. So I'll conclude with that. I'm sure if later on we get an opportunity, we'll fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ranade. Now, may I request Lieutenant General Bhatia, if he can make his points. So your mic is still mute, sir. Please put it on.
I'm audible now?
Hello.
Audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I must thank the organizers for this very forward-looking contemporary subject on the new world order and data sovereignty. And I will try and take off from where Mr. Ranade has left, saying that the world has to be sensitive to India's interests. What the anchor, Dr. Mahajan, just said, that we have to be looking at the superpower. So let me try and put it in a contextual framework, looking at the new world order, the emerging world order, and data sovereignty. As for the, COVID-19 has changed the world. We are looking at an emerging world order which we had not foreseen even a couple of months back. In the history of world, in the last 500 years, there have been 16 transitions of world power. Out of the 16 transitions last 500 years, 11 have been violent and only 5 have been non-violent. When I say non-violent, I mean they're not fully peaceful, but non-violent. Are we now looking at the 17th transition? I think so. Earlier, most of the strategic analysts were looking at 2050 because 2049 China was to become the world superpower, challenging the US. But I think COVID-19 has changed that, and post-COVID-19, we will see a world order where the balance of power, the power will shift from the west to the east. US has been hit very hard. Europe, as we all know, is let me put it bluntly, taking power. China is the emerging power, irrespective of what China has done for COVID or not done, and what our sentiment and emotions are. We should look at the next step, which is the emerging world order dictated by balance of power. Now, where does India come into this? India should be looking at balance of interest and not balance of power. We have to make sure, like you rightly said, that we should be in league with, we're a world power. We should be a global leader. In the emerging world order, there'll be vacuums created, and we should get our rightful place in the exclusive club of the world, whether it's WTO, whether it is IMF, whether it's WHO, the UN Security Council. These are the bodies which decide the global rules, and we are not part of it. We are part of many multilateral, forums, BRICS and IPSA, and we invite to G20, invite SEO, but the exclusive clubs of the world that is where we do not have the say we should have. So that is the emerging world order which we should be looking at. India as a global leader, ensuring its interests are looked after, and the world is sensitive to India's interests. India has the willpower, has the goodwill. Now, looking at the technologies, you see, the world order is based on geostrategy, geoeconomics, and geopolitics. We were doing reasonably well in all three, other than the economy, but the world is also economically not doing too well. But now the geotechnologies is what will drive the geopolitics, the geostrategy, and the geoeconomics. And the geotechnologies, the new age technologies like AI, like your big data analytics, IoT, you name it, autonomous vehicles, additive manufacturing, will be dictated by data. India is the largest generator of data. Unfortunately, we do not have resident data. Data is all outsourced. Even this webinar, when you put it on, it asks for permission, saying it wants access to my desktop files. No, why should it ask for permission for my desktop files? Any app which I download, it asks for 5 permissions: allow, and we just allow. Whether it's TikTok, 200 million users in India, Twitter. We just spoke about Twitter. How Twitter, you see, Pakistan started the Khalistan movement. It fueled the Khalistan movement, not started it. And today, you don't need Pakistan to do it. It is done in a virtual thing. So we are looking at data which can be manipulated to do what nations inimical to us want us to do. It could be actors, it could be states, it could be non-state actors. So data is exceedingly important. Tomorrow's world, which we see, nations go to war. I'm a security man, so I'll talk of security issues. Nations go to war because they want to impose their will on the adversaries. In tomorrow's world, I don't need to go to war. I have non-traditional security challenges. I have virtual societal warfare where I change the beliefs and the value system of society. So that is what we should be looking at in the future, and this will all be driven by data. So data becomes exceedingly important. I must quote, the Chinese Communist Party secretary, what he said on the 12th of March. I won't try and name him. I can't get the names right, unlike Mr. Ranade. On 12th March, the CPC secretary stated, and I quote, China will turn crisis into opportunity. It will transform, upgrade, and strengthen this position in the international industrial chain, adding to China's soft and hard power. With US power in the decline, China will be the next superpower. So that is what they are looking at. Coming to 5G, I don't think China supports the whoever $75 billion. We have national computing power at national level. Can we afford that sort of money? I don't know. I don't think so. Especially after post-COVID world, we will not have the divide our data into 3: the red data, the orange data, and the green data. All the data cannot be resident in India, but let's make sure that the orange data and the red data is resident in India. We have data laws, we have legislation which protect our interests. Our interests should be supreme. With quantum computing, and China is way ahead in quantum computing, today they can manipulate data. What would take years and years for the supercomputer to do, they can do it about 200 seconds. So I will end out there. I'll come to virtual societal warfare if in the next thing, because that is which is driven by data. The technology driven by data is data. So data sovereignty, I think, becomes exceedingly important, especially in the new emerging world order.
Thank you, Lieutenant General Bhatia. Now may I request my friend Vineet Goenka. Vineet is part of Bharatiya Janata Party, and earlier he was co-convener of the IT cell of the party. Plus, he works extensively on many of the issues. He is secretary of Center for Knowledge Sovereignty, and compiled and authored a really good book. Many of Mr. Ranade and Mr. Bhatia, they also shared their thought process in his book Data Sovereignty. And I, sir, really love the expression which he used in his book, that there was a time when people used army to conquer lands, and now this colonization is happening because they can control data. And my friend, now we all are seeing that your party is in government, and the attack on India's data sovereignty is deepening. So I want to understand your thought process. I know that you have a similar anguish in your mind as I have. So let's see how you articulate and balance it out with your party's thought process. So Mike is yours.
Yeah. Is this audible? Am I audible on this mic?
Yeah.
Yeah. In the last, 20-25 minutes, we heard something which really impacts the entire future of ours. So what we discussed in last 20 minutes is not that it's a view of two individuals, but this comes from a view of those individuals who have headed organizations which decides what will happen in India for the next 200 years. So when General Bhatia or Ranjit Saab speaks, then we all have to listen because they understand what is going on. And the similar pattern, let me now bring you to the book or the thought of data sovereignty which came to us. When I was talking to all my seniors, be it Lieutenant General Shekatkar, Lieutenant General Patil, Lieutenant General Khandare and others, we divided the entire quest, the thirst for quest by human race. The human race has inbuilt one deficiency which wants to rule other human being, and this quest is called as colonization. So we divided this colonization in a couple of parts. So first part, rightly said by Anilesh is that it was a military colonization which we saw for years, thousands of years, millenniums and millenniums. One would come with its military and rule over other person. Somebody came with sword, somebody came with cannon, then lately they started coming with aircrafts and tanks. So this happened over millenniums and we saw that. But in the last 100 years, the pattern changed. More of people started talking about civilization, democracies. People hated violence. People wanted to not see blood as such. But they were same violent people. The violence did not go out. They changed the way the violence is done, the way colonization is. This is called as energy colonization. They started dictating terms on energy. You will have to buy oil at this price from this particular supplier. I give this example very frequently. There is a country which wants to sell oil and we want to buy oil. But there is a third country which tries to dictate its terms. And then we saw OPEC coming up, OPEC plus coming up, and this and that geopolitics and geo-economical pressures which were built on people to buy particular oil from a particular country at a particular price. So that was a colonization going on in the world. But in the last 2 decades, we see another kind of thing which is coming up. This is called as digital colonization. Now nobody's trying to sell you oil. And the way the world is moving out of the clutches of oil and it is going more greener or alternate energy fuels, probably data will become one thing which is there. And we see this right now. Let me give you one example. In late 80s, we saw this movement which was happening, the K2, which was pushed by Pakistanis in Kashmir, and they spent a lot of money. We saw bloodshed, and the cost of the war to them was also huge. So when we were inflicted with economical challenges, when we were inflicted with challenges of sovereignty, the cost at their end was very high. But now if you compare with the cost which they are incurring to create problem in our country is minuscule, very, very less. And General Bhatia will endorse this particular part. To spend a bullet, they have to pump in ₹1 million, but to spend a click, it is few rupees which they can do it. So when they click one thing, they can create the same kind of divide, pain, anger, or anxiety in the citizens' mind, which they could not do with a bullet part of there. So we thought this should be discussed. And the challenge here is, as the world moves towards digitization, you cannot overlook the tools which are there. Now, for example, today we have to use this tool because you can't come together in a seminar hall or a discussion. It is not possible to, even if it is possible without the COVID challenge, people may not be able to travel. It's costly. So you would use digital things. And when you do discuss this, there are competing tools like AI and other tools which will be run by our advisories to understand what we are discussing. And can they take decisions out of this? Yes, they can take decisions. If they know how much marks are required in Bhagalpur, there may be somebody who may understand this particular thing and send mails, sent proposals to sell marks in Bhagalpur, sitting there in China, sitting there in US, understanding the conversation which were happening on emails and other forms of communication digitalizing. Now this insight, which is called as informed decision making, can be done better if you have decision making pointers, the data sets. And I think when you become slave of certain platforms, or you become slaves of particular apps which do not store the data within your political boundaries, within your country, then what happens is those people have the rights over the data. And of course, there is a saying in Marathi which I'll translate in English: "Jo tad rakhe to pani chakhe," means the person who guards the pond will always drink the water from that pond. So if you believe that they have encrypted, there is end-to-end encryption, nobody is listening to your conversation, nobody wants to see your conversation, well, you may take it as a civilian, but I would say the person is not giving you a favor by giving you free services. There is something behind that. And the reason behind that is simple economics. They would understand and do this. Let me take you to one more example. There were times when there was hard delivery of values being delivered. For example, when Shell came up, Shell would deliver oil to your cars. and then charge you money, and that created the valuation of that particular company. Or if you take, let us say as simple as Pepsi Cola or Coca Cola, which gives you a simple aerated water, but that aerated water would come to your mouth, you would drink that and then charge, and they would collect their fortunes from there. But what you see with the valuations of this Facebook, Twitters right now is there is nothing been tangible been shifted to you, yet the values are going up, and the values, the way it is going up, it is challenging the mind. So what is that? That is purely what they can do, analyze the data which has been shared by you. They understand how many people are there, what is the need of that, the proposals, the business market, we can be made accordingly. So a request was made by us, and then we converted that request into a demand, and then the demand became a movement. And so, you start request by writing few mails, sending an SMS to your seniors, then you start demanding by putting this into some forums, and finally, we all decided to come out and make this book. We write this book, and fortunately, the book was discussed and received well across. It was also discussed in the house and outside the house, and things are there. My request through your this discussion, all these people who are listening to us, there are a lot of audience which I can see here who are listening to us. We have to be aware that when we talk, this talk is stored somewhere, this data is stored somewhere, and this could generate somebody's revenue, and this can deprive us from revenue. Tomorrow somebody can dictate. Let me give you one example which happened with us few days back. We were just trying to monitor something, and we saw a tweet done by who is wanted by Indian agencies, who's been declared fugitive by Indian agency. This gentleman does a tweet. Now there are two arguments. A person like me would not take the argument, but there are certain section of the society in our country who would talk about free speech. Now under free speech, you can speak anything. But when you say you can speak anything, it also comes with a right. A reasonable liberty is used. You cannot go overboard and say you will divide this country. Let me take it a little further. Nobody can give an advertisement about breaking this country. And you know what? This person puts a tweet, pays money to Twitter, Twitter receives the money, and then tries to promote that particular tweet whereby they talk about breaking our country and try to talk about the key to movement of this. Now, this particular thing could be done by them because they have access to Indians who are there on Twitter. And what is the number of people who are there on Twitter? It is not 1, 2, 3. It is more than 40 million. It comes to 4 to 5 crore people from India. Now, see the irony. The total population of Twitter, if we remove Indians, it is not substantial. The moment, for argument's sake, if you remove Indians who are there on Twitter, Twitter's valuation is zero, almost zero. It will come down. It becomes Twitter, the incorporation, the valuation, because we Indians are there. Now they are trying to sell the same pain which some interested party, some adversary wanted to sell it to you through this thing. So whether it is selling masks to you, selling some medicines to you, selling some garments to you, or trying to sell this pain of separating a company, breaking a country, all comes through this particular thing where they know who is talking what. And what is the irony? They would not show this tweet to people who are there right now on this discussion. They would not dare, and their algorithms will make sure the tweet is not seen by General Bhatia or Anadeji or Chandrasekharji, or for that matter even to you, Anilesh. But they would show these kind of tweets to the people who are vulnerable, because their systems, their competition, their AI would tell them that, okay, these are the people who have some anger against the establishment. These are the people who do talk about this particular subject sometimes. So this is the recruitment methodology being used, which has tools which can challenge our integrity and challenge our society. As rightly said by my earlier speaker, what the adversary does is he enforces his civilization, his food, his language, his culture, his religion on you, also the buying pattern. So what will happen now is we will move out of military colonization and we will get enslaved by the people who have digital strokes over there. And see the pain. One place we all jumped and criticized China when it acquired 1% in the HDFC Bank. And if you go a little deeper and understand economics, they were holding 0.78% in HDFC before the COVID lockdown started. By Jan 15th, if you see, the record shows that 0.78 was been holded by them. What they actually did is to just acquire 0.22, which made it over 1%. And the entire country talked about it. We demanded legislation to be made so that nobody can invest. And of course, a legislation came in with a rider, the neighbors will not invest. And irony is our memories are so short that within 4 or 5 days, we see another news of Facebook investing 9% in Geo. And we all started congratulating. Now, I don't understand this particular conflict in the mind of intellectuals. I could forego this if somebody was a class 10 student who does not understand and he congratulated. But I could see the same man put me a WhatsApp saying कि क्या कर रहा है हिंदुस्तान, कैसे चाइना को 1% दे सकता है. The same gentleman jumps over and writes a half a page WhatsApp message to me. Congratulations, we have the largest investment. Sir, they also have colonized us. They have taken over 9%, which is a larger share than 1%. Now this conflict, and see what beautifully somebody has hijacked your mind, very beautifully hijacked, and we see this has to be good and that has to be bad. अब in Hindi there are two words, Sapnath and Nagnath. कैसे फर्क होगा? Both have poison. Both the poisons are lethal. How can one be good and another be bad? So here we'll have to discuss what is wrong with this country. 130 crore people. The people who invented zero, the people who talked about operations and operation theaters way back 5,000 years with Dadij. Those people who were talking about different things, ways of flying on the earth. How can we can't have a single tool which can become a social media giant in this world? How can't we talk about apps which can take over these apps? All these apps, if you see, primarily are successful because we South Asians and specifically Indians volume wise use it. We are not only been subscribing them, it's not that as simple as that a Westerner who subscribes Facebook and uses Facebook once in a week or twice in a week. We have a habit of putting everything, मेहंदी से लेके बिंदी सब कुछ उस पर डाल देते हैं. So we use it multiple times in a day. The number of transactions which happen are in millions. So we'll have to push our government, including my party, my government. We'll have to push, create consensus, create that kind of pressure. We say, where are our IITs? Where are our CDOCs, CDACs, CDOTs, NICs? Why are they not coming with this? They are fantastic people. They are very nice engineers. They are scientists. They can come together. As far as it goes for the will, that will has to come there. Now, let me talk about money. I was talking to Honorable Member of Parliament Hegedeji today morning that what do we do post that particular expose which we did yesterday. We are not people who would like to just make noise and keep quiet. We are people who would like to go into a positive way and put forward to government some solution. And something came to my mind that post-COVID, there will be challenge of employment. There will be a need where government pumps in money, say that hey, this grant or this kind of things. Why not request government through this kind of forums, push the government, whereby zero interest funds can be given to Indian IT giants. Then be it be Infosys, TCS, Wipro, whatever. I don't have liking for one or disliking for another. Anybody who has got more than 50% Indian shares, Indians who hold that share, those companies can be given interest-free soft loan and been asked that yes, why don't you challenge this? And once you do that kind of thing, and just assume that one Indian entity, whether private or public, makes an alternate to this, and leadership of the country migrate to it, saying that yeah, I'll just migrate to this particular tool and overlook, or I will come out of the tools which are currently foreign tools. I'm sure that crores of Indians will follow the suit immediately, and the valuation of our own tool will go up and the valuation of the other tool will go down. This movement has to be created by us, and I think that is the movement of data sovereignty, where you say my data will not go out. Will you like your people, your goal to go out? The same way the data has to be there. So data sovereignty is nothing but to store the data within the country so that LES, law enforcement agencies, will have access, and so that nobody else harnesses it to make money out of that, so that nobody else rules over your mind, your thought process. Then the way I give that example of HDFC and Geo, somebody just very simply manipulated with your mind within 200 hours. So this kind of things we can discuss further as the conversation goes ahead. Anilesh, I would like to thank you and everybody who has organized this beautiful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vineet. In fact, I would later on in the interaction, I would like to have your views on data protection law, which India is framing. We all have criticized this as this is a copy of a cut copy paste of the EU model of general data protection regulations. GDPR as we call it. So that needs to be more stringent. Like they start differentiating about what is a good data or what is a sensitive data, which can be exported, which can't be exported. But now we are seeing that retail sector is being targeted by these digital companies. So that means the data of my small spending is worth is worth for them. So is it good for a country like India, to export such data out? and give leverage to these companies, or create data pool inside the country and treat it as a new oil. They should come in India and invest rather than taking the things out. So I would want to have more views of yours onto that. So now may I request Mr. Chandrasekhar, if he can make his remarks. So your voice is not coming. I think still on mute.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you, Anileshji, for that, for this opportunity. Also, I do want to compliment the previous speakers on having brought out very, very lucidly what are some of the monumental challenges in the way in which we manage data and the implications for national security and the security of the country. So while completely recognizing the importance and the overwhelming importance of national security and the criticality of that, I want to also talk about some of the other dimensions, not because they are more important than national security, but because they have been so well covered by the previous speakers. To my mind, data sovereignty essentially means the ability of the government to actually control the way that data is regulated in the country. Who can generate, who can store, who can add value, who can capture value, how it can be taxed. All of these things are subject to the laws of the country, not just in theory and in law, but in practice also. And when you look at it in practice, then of course a lot of it depends on your own technological capability, because if you don't have that technological capability, both in terms of hardware and in terms of software, and particularly platforms, which have become the main basis on which data is transferred between people, then your ability to actually enforce anything is both highly suspect and probably entirely imaginary. So from an overall national perspective, we should really be looking at data as a public good, which means national security from a country point of view, privacy from an individual point of view, and economic opportunity from the national economy point of view, because the economic activity surrounding data and a lot of the things that have been talked about earlier have both a security implication and also a huge economic implication. And in today's complex world, where encroachments on sovereignty are not by physically occupying, but by occupying the entire economic space, our strength comes from our strengths, not something that is conferred by the Committee of Nations, but our strengths in technology, our strengths in how we manage data, and how we build our economic strength leveraging that data. What COVID has reminded us is that the future is going to be marked by some form of social distancing and highly escalated digital proximity or digital connectivity. So social distance and digital connect would be the hallmark, and that actually makes these issues even more important and makes these transitions which we have been going through actually happen at a much more accelerated pace. So all of these are not only critical issues, but they are now very, very urgent issues that we have to address. So if we are looking at how data could be used for the larger public good, then we have to look at all of the steps in the whole chain of data: collection, storage, sharing, usage, how it is interpreted, how it is monetized. Because at the end of the day, we also have to recognize that there are huge economic forces that are driving this movement in data, and one could say the trade in data. And a good law is one which actually leverages the economics favorably rather than tries to fight against it, because if the laws are not aligned with the economics of it, then it becomes so much more difficult to implement it. So as far as possible, we need to sort of leverage the economics of the operation as well. So if you look at the facets of the data governance, there are three distinct aspects that I think we need to look at. One is as a facilitator for commercial transactions. This was referred to earlier. The second is as capital in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on, because technology, technological capability, something which China has done in recent years, at an exceptional pace, and are now in a position not only to compete with the US, but to actually overtake it. And the third aspect of governance is as basic infrastructure in a digitized economy. And since it plays all this role and can generate great private and social value and create massive information asymmetries and market power, there is a need for public policy on all of these aspects. I mentioned that technology is critical because today, if you see, people are parting with that data, so it is not being taken coercively in a physical sense, but as was pointed out, even with regard to the current medium that we are using, this parting with it voluntarily is a bit of a misnomer, because for using anything you have to part with data, and then that data has a commercial value. For example, in the COVID situation, there were some estimates of the value of an individual's data relating to healthcare, and the amount would actually be very surprising. It's a staggering amount, running into thousands of rupees. So that's the kind of economic value that is contained within that data, and we need to figure out how we actually balance this, because it's all very well to talk about data as the new oil, but if you have no technical capability or no technological capability on how to process oil, what can you do with the oil? If you don't have refining capability, you don't have storage capability, you don't have transportation capability, you don't have automotive technology, then there's nothing much you can do with the oil. So we have to focus on both the data and the means to actually convert that data into both economic power as well as a security instrument and as an insurer of our security. Today, the very access to data itself also enables the creation of new technologies in AI, in data sciences, and so on. I had mentioned about one of the key attributes of sovereignty being also how it is subjected to tax. When the equalization levy was introduced in 2016 on the global giants, there was quite a lot of murmuring, but eventually it was swallowed. The more recent introduction in the recent budget of the levy on the gross income, I think elicited a couple of days ago threats from the US saying that this is contrary to international law, which is factually incorrect. But I suppose the factual inaccuracies have become quite common these days. So as we look at all of these, the question is how can India lead? And how do we keep in view that we have both aggressive and defensive interests? Aggressive in a commercial sense, I don't mean in a military sense or in a colonization sense. But we have a massive IT industry whose future also depends on the kind of data that it can get access to and the kind of reciprocity which exists. So we need to recognize that we have both aggressive and defensive interests, and our policy should be framed to maximize the value within the country. For example, some very interesting concepts which have come, which perhaps a country like India can play a leadership role in driving across the world, given our strength in IT, is the concept of data enclaves, which are more like just as an embassy in a country is treated as the territory of that country. The concept of data being sovereign, irrespective of where it is stored, and the access to that data and the regulation on that data being completely subject to the regulation of that originating country, is also a concept which has been floated. and which actually is being implemented in some countries like Estonia, although it has not really caught up very much. So these are some of the things that we need to think about as we try to balance our various interests. So all of this, to my mind, requires a comprehensive data policy which maximizes public good subject to the requirements of national security as well as individual privacy. It maximizes the value creation and retention. I think this is critical, because we should not forget that the economic dimension of this is critical for our country, because without that economic strength, we will not really be able to occupy our rightful position. And it has to keep in view this comprehensive data policy has to keep our domestic and international interests in mind. It has to work in consonance with the economics of the whole data market. And finally, the basis on which all of this data exchange takes place, which is the telecom network and the infrastructure that it rides on. Whether you talk about the future technologies like 5G, which are already around the corner, or you talk about the core infrastructure, the networks, and all the key equipment that drives these networks. I think we do have substantial capability, but I would say that we are still a little short of the kind of cutting edge capabilities, and it requires a careful strategy to build that capability within the country. Whether it is in the public sector or private sector is not important, but being able to build that capability within the country and ensure that that capability remains within the country. For strategic and sensitive technologies, every country has policies which prevent those companies from being sold out. Because remember, in a country like India, people can buy into companies. So you may have 100% of the equity with XYZ today, but tomorrow, why 1%, why 9%, it can be 100% sold to other countries and people from other countries. So we need to identify some of these strategic areas and ensure that we build those technologies within the country, encourage the private sector to do that, encourage investment from outside as well as technology being brought in, but keep a tight control over how the data is regulated and how it is managed. So all of these do require discussion, and as we go forward, I think we can talk further on some of these points. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chandrasekhar. It was actually you hit nailed with a hammer, and that hit was hard enough. I was seeing, the other panelists, they were excited to hear many of your points. And this indeed is actually our worry also, that, that the capability, especially from the data processing and analyzing the data which we store, that has to be enhanced. There is no doubt about that. But you touched upon certain areas, that how the hardware, that can also be indigenized. Mr. Rai also spoke about the 5G capabilities. Smitaji is working extensively in not only galvanizing the capacity, plus also bringing many of those players together and trying to put their case forcefully in front of the policymakers. So Smitaji, you can make your points.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. So thank you for inviting me for this very interesting seminar, and I really enjoyed listening to all of you. As you may know, you may not know this, but I have really been focusing on manufacturing indigenization. And yet, this has tremendous convergence with the topic in hand, because really today there is complete convergence between the manufacturing and digital worlds. And data and digitization are really the foundations for economic growth today. And not just economic growth. If you open up Jane's Defense Weekly, you will find that every single article focuses on on digitization. Every weapon is being digitized, and now even being artificial intelligence is being introduced into every weaponry, and therefore it's becoming more and more lethal in an exponential way. Data also is now the basis for 5G for artificial intelligence, as other speakers have pointed out. So there's an enormous convergence in these areas. And as already pointed out by previous speakers, India is generating a huge amount of data, but somehow we need to create an ecosystem in which we can capitalize on this this enormous resource. We need to create global tech companies. We need to protect our data sovereignty, and we need especially to protect our domestic e-companies. You have referred to the Flipkart. I don't think anybody actually has referred to the Flipkart deal, but a few years ago, Flipkart, which was founded by people who had left Amazon, had appealed to the government for protection. But unfortunately, that was it was the open policy, FDI, etc. And we didn't protect Flipkart. And today, Walmart has basically invested in it, and it's basically become a foreign company. Then the Rio Facebook deal, it's not just about data. Apparently, Facebook has been trying to monetize WhatsApp for a very long time. And what the Rio platform will give it is the ability to monetize it. I've got a very interesting article by the Ken, which I've sent to some of you. I'll be happy to send to the others if you share your email. So basically, we have the prospect of an enormous disruption in our payments ecosystem. And of course, I mean, the data issue, the data privacy issue, data sovereignty issues are going to come to the fore. And if you recall, there was an article, and this has been openly admitted by Facebook. They have been sharing information on data of users with China. So, so it is really a deal that we need to roll back. I'll be frank. I think we need to roll it back because unfortunately now Vodafone, Airtel, to make up for lost revenues, etc., they are looking at this particular precedent. So I hope that people will realize the danger inherent in this deal and what it forebodes for our domestic ecosystem. Now, our strategy so far and the advice that is being given to governments is that we should join the so-called global value chains. Sitara, which stands for Science, Indigenous Technology and Advanced Research Accelerator, believes in exactly the opposite. We should create these global value chains. We should be on top of them. We should, if we get in FDI, it should be to enhance our capabilities, not to join at the lowest ends, which is why we are objecting to the production linked incentive scheme, which I will not go into detail right now because I've already requested Anilesh ji to kindly hold another session on the issue of production linked incentive and also BSNL. BSNL I'll go into a little deeper because Sri Ranade has mentioned that I'm very happy to hear that, and other speakers also have said this, that we must have our own 5G, we must build our own 5G networks. But unless our companies are brought into 4G, you see, in the last few tenders that BSNL has floated, they've all gone to ZTE, Fiber Home, all Chinese companies, Huawei. Our companies haven't got a single penny. Not only they haven't got a single penny, they have not been paid dues. Almost 2,000 crores are stuck. Now, how is a country going to promote its high-tech sector unless these issues are tackled? And I hope your forum helps in tackling these issues. It's no point talking about being a superpower when the one high-tech sector that we have, we are willing to sacrifice it. So these are all interconnected issues, whether it's data ownership, whether it's ownership of telecom networks. And I've pointed this out earlier. China's core military doctrine, at the core of its military doctrine lies information warfare. And you conduct information warfare through digital networks. You have given away your telecom networks to China, some of them at least. And Airtel also, many others are using Chinese products. I believe even Jio now is thinking about it. So we need to have a Telecom Security Act, which we are working upon. And in that, we have to ensure ownership of telecom networks, indigenous ownership. And I feel that you all will support it because the things you're saying are totally compatible with what we are proposing. And finally, the third interconnected issue is cybersecurity. With data comes the need to protect it. And India has some of the finest cybersecurity companies in the world. Unfortunately, because of white branding, Ericsson, Nokia, Cisco, they're all buying from our companies, but it is not known. It is not known that our companies, which are 10 years ahead of international competition, are the ones which are actually protecting us, but under the name of Ericsson, Cisco, this, that, and the other. So we need a comprehensive policy. I think all of you perhaps have mentioned this need for a comprehensive policy, a common strategic vision to rule the converging manufacturing and digital worlds. And the starting point of this vision, according to us, is not to come in from the bottom, but to come in from the top. And all of you have mentioned that India has got brilliant minds. And I've been reading this fascinating book by Robert Sapolsky, who has talked about the physiological, neurological, and cultural origins of the brain and behavior. And it's clear that with thousands of years of culture behind us, we have developed excellent brains. And Indian brains are powering developments all over the world, except, I mean, not so much in India. So basically, we need to bring in India at the top of the value chains. And then I would like to also talk about the capability issue, that we need to prove our capability. We can only prove our capability if we have the markets. I can tell you from the tenders we have examined, most entities are putting in impossible conditions in these tenders, like the Magic Gartner Quadrant, etc., which automatically rule out Indian companies. In our own country, we are not able to get our own tenders. So this is one very important issue that we need to tackle and which needs to be brought to the attention of our top leadership. Data enclaves, yes, that's a very interesting idea. So the thing is that what is critical is really not just capital availability, which is really important, which is why I think Chinese venture capital funds are so welcome in India. They give money. It's markets. We have to ensure through our ecosystem and through our policies that our companies get the market. And the policy framework should therefore encompass 4 or 5 areas. That is domestic ownership of telecom networks, domestic ownership of e-com platforms, data sovereignty, there should be no compromise there, and FDI controls. We have to have some sort of policy which FDI has to have some performance requirements. Not just, anything is acceptable and we just give up everything for foreign control. And by the way, economics 101, the more FDI we get, the less our national income is. Because when you see the national income of developed countries, because of their ownership of assets abroad, the national income is is larger than their GDP. Ours is less than our GDP because of such a huge ownership abroad. So that's why I actually welcome when Indian companies acquire companies abroad, because the profits from that will flow to India and increase our national income. So these are the issues that we need to look at. And I would suggest that our group comes up with a white paper. We have the capabilities. Sri Ranade has a full think tank with him. Sri Chandrasekhar also, Sri Goenka, Lieutenant General Bhatia. All of you are highly experienced people. Anilesh ji has the full resources of the Business Today group behind him. And we can all put our heads together, come up with a comprehensive policy. And this I can assure you, because this strategy has been proven in all the countries I have been studying over the last few years. And this strategy has led to economic growth, not the advice of IMF returned people, etc., who have been telling our country, open up, do not protect yourselves, do not reserve anything for yourself. And we will very soon basically be a playground for foreign multinationals. So thank you for this opportunity to make my presentation, and I hope that we can have an action plan coming from this. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ranade, he made quite interesting points that, from the economist point of view, that how, Indian ownership is required. But what we are seeing in last, 6 years of this regime, especially, they're trying to cut down on the Chinese, imports, and they're trying to balance out the trade. But it's not working. But we have also seen that Chinese investments have increased. So what is, as your think tank's point of view, especially from the data's point of view, that what should be the government of India's strategy, whether to allow or maintain the business as usual with the Chinese companies, or there is a requirement of alteration which is needed. What is the thought process in your think tank, and especially since you deal with these issues? So that's why I'm asking you.
Well, investment is always a good thing. So that is the basic position. But a lot depends on where the investment is coming from and for which sectors it is going. I mean, which sectors is it going to? So our position has always been, and in fact, my position has been for many years now, including when I was in the system, in the government, that certain critical sectors need to be insulated from investment by countries which are not friendly with us. I put in that critical infrastructure like precision machining, like telecommunication, like cyber. So these are the areas where we said we would not like an investment because it leads to many other things. Secondly, we would neither want them to sell equipment, etc., to them. I will give you one example. We used to have companies, including a PSU, which used to produce power turbines, power generation turbines.
Yes.
Now, over the years, we find that the Chinese are supplying it. And when you talk to the buyers, they tell you, look, it's cheaper, it's quicker, and they send it straight away. So why should we go to a firm which is going to take so much time? And I think here the government has to think long and hard that it's not a question of just stopping the Chinese from selling it, but it's a question of how we can up the game ourselves, how we can ensure that we don't lose this precision machining capability, which we are today in danger of losing. The second thing is, and I think Ms. Purushottam referred to it, was our telecommunication sector, how they got in. Now that's a story in itself, how they got in. You'd be surprised to know that concerned sections of the government were not aware of Huawei having got in into Bangalore. But that apart, today around 70% of our telecommunications network, I'm talking about the entire setup, the backroom operators or the backdoor operators are Chinese companies, because our companies find it easier to give it to them on a contract and they manage it. So they're not upfront, they're not open, but we are actually making ourselves very vulnerable to that. Now again here, it's also a question of our own capabilities. So here there are three suggestions that actually we need to look at, three things we need to look at. Firstly, building up our own capacities, encouraging our own people to come up with prototypes or build up small companies and then scale them up further. It can be done. It's being done elsewhere. That's how you get these little islands of growth. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to develop them for a number of reasons. The other is how we can help our companies move ahead. I think someone here made the point, very valid point, that a Chinese company today has a huge amount of money to back its efforts. Our companies, one, though we are in a not a communist command economy, but yet A, they don't have that kind of money, and B, they have to look back to Delhi for decisions, which actually they should be able to take themselves. So when we talk of devolution, we should also be talking about devolution like this. One instance I'll give you of today, which is going away from this a little bit, is oil. Oil today, the value of oil is at an all-time low. We have not built, though we've been talking about it for at least 15 years, building strategic storage capacity, we have not built it. We have got a few which are full, and we are now looking around for big oil tankers in which we can fill them up and keep them. But that's not the way of going about it. So what I'm trying to say is, we maybe have thought about it. We may have had somewhere a concept paper, which people like us may have produced, but we haven't got going. We haven't pushed it. We haven't gotten it. And there are many reasons. Some of us may be thinking the same way, the others are not thinking the same way, which brings me back to the final point, which is something you spoke about. Government has to think as one. We cannot have a situation like we have today where the top of the government says, look, let's be careful on what China is doing, where it is investing, and which sectors it is getting into, and yet the next branch of the government says, no, that's Chinese are fine, we should go ahead and buy with them. There are a number of examples like this. So I think first thing is we have got to have our sort of plan or our program and send that message down the line and then operate.
Thank you, Mr. Ranade. Lakshminandana Bhatia, there is another concern which comes to our mind that there are several digital players, they ask for extra information. For example, ByteDance, the Chinese company, their products like TikTok and Hello, they ask for location of the users. What the hell they have to do with the location. So there are metrics, which we all understand that they must be building up. Then we have Paytm, which has more than 50% investment from Alibaba. Then we also see that several Chinese investors, they are getting into our startup ecosystem. So does this, worry you? Because modern day warfare, we are in a warlike situation. We are fighting Corona, but we understand that many of the things are originating from a particular geography. Do you think that to get prepared for the modern warfare, we need to be wary of many of these apps, as well as the data they seek? Today I might be giving them the access because I'm not aware, as a common user. But the metrics they build up, that can be critical for a country like India. So, what's your thought process into this?
You see, that is the security concerns I was talking about. All these apps, in 2017, there were 17 apps which were Chinese up to the top 100, which the Indians downloaded. Today, it's 44 apps out of the 100 top apps downloaded by Indians. Indians are the maximum users of the Chinese apps like TikTok, that game PUBG. So what they're trying to do is they have all our data. They're manipulating, like they use the word economic space, the mind space. The mind space is now given to people who control their data. So he can manipulate that data. He can manipulate our minds. He can, anyone who controls the data can adjust our value systems. Can change our behavior patterns. So there is a major danger out there. We have to understand that Indians have the best brains, like was said earlier by but we have the best brains when not in India, when outside India. These brains have to reside in India. They have to work for India, for Indians. Everything is being done now from outside. It is cheap. It is money is being given. We don't have an ecosystem. We have policies, unfortunately, which are made with something in mind. And then if we have the policies, the processes and the procedures remain unchanged. So it is not easy to do business in India. We may say ease of doing business is improving, but the fact remains that we do not encourage self-reliance in manufacturing. We do not encourage self-reliance. We have the best IT brains, whether the back-end IT is out here. But then I find that Chinese, everything I want to do, the L1, to put it bluntly, we are a nation now controlled by, munshis. Kingdom have lost because of the munshi. The munshi wanted to keep the book reading right. We have a L1 system in place. We don't have a L1, T1, Q1. So L1 will come from China. There will be, everything I want to buy, whether it's hardware, I can have something, but it will have supply chain infection. Even in US, Amazon Prime Videos, they found out they had a chip which the China inserted out there, and they were controlling everything from there. So even today, most of our things, our chips are controlled by China, or by the US for that matter. And whether the US or China doesn't matter. Both are, both look after their interests. There's no permanent enemies or friends. Only permanent interests. So we have to understand that certain things We do not have the monies right now, honestly. We cannot say that everything should be controlled by India, everything should be Indian, but we should set in motion, set in place things which will take us, let's say, in the near to mid-term, we should achieve this. We should have a roadmap, and the long term, we should achieve this. Especially the applications, the apps. They're developing apps so fast and so well, and giving us for free. WhatsApp does not have a business model, like it's brought out earlier. Facebook bought WhatsApp for $20 billion, but where's the business model of WhatsApp? So WhatsApp has to get into the Facebook has to get into the WhatsApp business model. TikTok again. Look at the users of TikTok. Indians are the maximum users, 200 million users. So this is something which we have to recognize that we have to correct it. We have to have policies in place, and we have to encourage a purely Indian ecosystem. We're going to make it cost effective for them. We have to encourage our own Indian systems. We don't have a choice.
Vineet, do you want to add on to this?
Yeah, I think pretty well it has been talked.
Maybe
probably we'll pass on the questions to the audience or maybe other panelists.
Smrita, you wanted to speak.
Yes, thank you. Regarding your point, you see, psychological warfare is an integral component of Chinese information warfare strategy. So their ownership of all these apps is a real concrete danger. Thank you.
Mr. Chandrasekhar, the investments, which need to come to counter many of these Chinese or the American apps, that needs to come from the entrepreneurs, whom I'm sure NASCOM and the IT secretary you also be nurturing. So, what is your experience? Why India has not been able to produce these type of warriors, entrepreneur warriors?
Yeah. You see, there are 2-3 things, and some of these apply to manufacturing as much as they do to data and the platforms that we are talking about. One is that you do need to be liberal as far as investment is concerned and as far as acquiring or purchasing technology is concerned. But you have to find a way to leverage the domestic demand, whether it is for manufacturing or whether it is the data that is available. That's what China has done, for example. Of course, they have done it in the Chinese style. We can't do it in the same way, but we have to figure out our own way of leveraging these resources, of hooking Indian demand to this, to building up this capability. The moment you do that, I think investment has to flow and is bound to flow, because the moment people realize that you cannot tap into the Indian market and abstract value without actually investing there and without actually building either manufacturing capability or platform capability or storage capability there, then it will come. There's no question about it, because the demand is so huge that it cannot be ignored. I mean, we are, after all, if you look at the kind of numbers, these are staggering numbers. Why is the Jio Facebook deal attracting so much attention? Because Jio has 388 million subscribers. WhatsApp has more than 400 million subscribers. Facebook has 320 million subscribers. I mean, these numbers, even on a planetary scale, are enough to sort of make anybody, wide-eyed. So the question, however, is that we sometimes mix up our notions of what we need to be open on and what we don't need to be open on. And that's where then this, confusion comes in. We want to be open. We want to allow people to abstract value. And then we want to build capability without affording any kind of preference or access to the entrepreneurs in India. So I think this difference between the demand, the investment, and the technology, and dealing with each of these differently, what to be open on and what to be not so open on, is something that we have to be careful about. I also want to mention that, we have talked about this on other platforms in the past, that Indian capability in electronics manufacturing relative to the world was probably far better in the 70s, 80s and pre-liberalization. But post WTO, a lot of this actually got hollowed out. And we were bound to a zero tariff regime in a lot of the electronics and all the critical areas that we are talking about today, like telecom. So at that time, but there are now workarounds, some smart people have found that now there are workarounds which can enable us to get around it, provided we have a mind to do that. So I think first is we have to be clear that what is our strategic interest and what is our approach. Then we can actually figure out how it is to be done. And to my mind, it is something which can be done and should be done. But if we do not have the technology capability, we do not have the manufacturing capability within the country, then it is only a choice of whom we are subservient to, or who is, in a sense, pulling the puppet strings. And to my mind, as an Indian, it doesn't matter to me whether I'm controlled by X or Y from outside the country or X or Y country. I'm still a vassal state. So I think that is something that we should be, extremely careful about and have a roadmap to how we build the capability to insulate ourselves in some of these critical areas.
So one of the questions which is coming from the audience is about Google, that they are saying that we Indians have too much concern about the Chinese, but we somehow skip, the American players. So they are saying that Google is one of the biggest damager of the ecosystem. So what is the security establishment's thought on Google? So Mr. Ranade and Mr. Bhatia, if you can briefly reply to our audience.
Well, it's a very good question. Let me put it like that: is between the devil and the deep sea. And I think that's the point that Mr. Chandrasekhar just made, that unless we have our own capability, we'll remain vassals. But let me tell you, let me come out with two quick points on this. The first is that the security establishment would prefer, of course, developing our own rather than being dependent on one or the other. So that's the overall position. But second is that the Chinese are next door. They are not friendly. We have a border problem with them, and they have malevolent intent, in the sense that if they're here, they can play around with our systems at times which are of critical importance to us. The Americans are further away. They don't have such an interest in India of that kind, a malevolent interest. And so, given a choice between these two, I think we would be more tolerant of the Google, where the immediate threat is not so much. But as I said, it's a very difficult choice to make, because we are aware that both, in any case, will be pulling out whatever they can.
Mr. Bhatia, if you want to add?
No, I think we'll have to look at again. We have to look at our interests, but then our interests, our national interests, should take override priority over everything else. But we have to live in a global world. It's an interconnected world. It's a networked world. We cannot do a Google. We cannot do a TikTok. Both are required. Both will be there. We may discuss in this forum, in this platform, but on ground things will not change so easily. So what we need to do is build our own capabilities, have a roadmap for that, and we have legislation in place, laws in place, effective laws in place to protect our interests. And Mr. Vineet Goenka can, I think, speak a little bit on the data protection bill, which was tabled in the Parliament in December 2019, and how to go about it. Even in the budget session, we have earmarked certain amount of monies for data centers. But that is all we can afford. Is that enough? No, it is not enough. So where do we get the monies from? Where do we get the alternate structures from, alternate models from? So that is what needs to be seen. And for that, I think we need to have a team. We need to have legislation for it. We need to have the policy makers looking at, the decision makers looking at it. More of data sovereignty, like this book which is there, which has raised questions. But more and more people like this platform, like today, what you have started off. We need more audience, more people to listen to it. Awareness has to be there. Awareness is the first thing, and information and awareness will follow to good policies.
Yeah, and we also have a question from Professor Shubhra Sagar. Can you unmute her mic, our technical team? I think there's some problem with her mic. Smitaji, you wanted to say something?
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to state about capabilities. We keep saying that we need our capabilities, but even Google was built, Google search engine was built with a grant from the National Science Foundation. The Americans are the biggest example of an activist science state. A lot of the innovations that Apple supposedly has all been funded from the American government and their big blockbuster drugs, etc. I would say that our state, our government should also come in very proactively to build our capabilities. Thank you.
Thank you. We're still not able to get Shubhra's question. So maybe now we, request we need to speak about, that bill and what is his thought process on that. Maybe for 5 minutes if you want to make points, then we can request Ashwini ji to come in and he make his concluding remarks.
I'll quickly make a point in 1 or 2 minutes because if everybody is waiting for Dr. Ashwini ji to come in and speak. In the PDP bill, everything else is fine, but there are 2 points which we also met it. We had discussion in 2018, a lot of roundtables. General Bhatia led a couple of roundtables, and then we came out with a paper and submitted that to Justice Sri Krishna also. And also, we're trying to interact with the people who are there in the committee right now. And we also had an opportunity to meet Lieutenant General Rajesh Pant, who is formalizing the cybersecurity policy strategy paper for 2030. Here, 2 essential things which I feel should be pushed in, and they have still not been taken care in that particular bill. A is about data sovereignty. So by the way saying that this is critical data, this is not so critical data, we're trying to send things out. Once you start doing that, then this gray line will always increase and more data will go out. So the one was that there has to be a push about data sovereignty, whereby the data would be within the country. P, this does not talk about the right to forget. The data which has been written, there is no right to forget. You may write some data right now, but over the period it should be forgotten or should not be accessed by anybody or anybody. So that's 2 particular points were been enforced by us. Yes, third, one more important thing which General Bhatia and everybody talked about is making a commission or an authority whereby it's an independent body which controls the data, like you have Atomic Energy Commission or Election Commission, which are fairly political neutral. They do not have a color, and they can self-fund by charging maybe a rupee to a connector, so that in the policies which are formulated do not have political colors, and they work in the interest of the country. So these 3 important communications were done at all the levels. I wish it is done, and I also wish that it passes through. Now it has been pending for a long.
Thank you, Vineet. Sir, we have another question: how to develop the ICT infrastructure such as server, data warehouses? We are still reliant on Amazon's web services for these AWS services. Even NIC uses AWS. ICT is a huge economic opportunity, and where are we? So, any panelists want to take this question?
I think
Mr.
Mr.
Chandrasekhar, if you want to.
Let me take a stab at this. You see, I think first and foremost, we should appreciate the fact that we cannot be completely self-reliant in every aspect of these technologies. The world has become far too complex and intricately interwoven for us to expect to be completely dependent on ourselves for every component of technology. What we need to look at is, given the strategic objectives, how do we actually sort of pick and choose the things in which we want to be self-reliant, have the capability within the country, and what are the things where we are okay as long as somebody else is doing it and we are able to control it to the required degree. So if you look at even the point of the data itself, sometimes when we are looking at sovereignty and control, we are looking at localization only as the solution. But while localization may be important, that does not guarantee that you have actually control over the data. There are many technologies which stand in between you and the data that may be physically stored within the country. So we have to keep all of these aspects in mind as we go forward. Having said all of that, therefore, when you come to storage, now we have, for example, a couple of months earlier, Reliance and Microsoft had announced a partnership for building up the server farms and the data storage. So you have AWS, you have Microsoft, Reliance as a partnership, but then again the technology is coming from Microsoft. So what it boils down to is a calibrated approach where you build the requisite capabilities and then start using them and leveraging the domestic market. If you do it without having enough preparation and without having the requisite technologies or without having the roadmap, then you will end up with technology which is inferior or technology which is not up to the mark. In today's world, as far as data is concerned, there is nothing like perfect security. Everybody knows that you can only be secure up to a point, but the more the less cutting edge your technology is, the more vulnerable you are. So you can be storing all the data here, but if you are not using or don't have access to the latest technologies, then you are far more vulnerable than in a different situation. So I think we should definitely keep building our storage capabilities, but we can't sort of overnight be self-dependent on that. And the second thing is that we need to make sure that it is not at the cost of using technology which is not state of the art.
I can see several hands, they want to ask questions, but we are running short of time. So, I would request everybody in the audience to put their question in writing in chat. Even if, this time gets over, you just mention the name of the panelist. I will personally request them to answer your queries. So now may I request Dr. Ashwini Mahajan to come in and give his concluding remarks. There is a limitation in this software that only 6 people can be visible. So I'll be switching off my video so that we can have Ashwini ji in. So I'm putting it off, but I think I'll be available through audio. Hello, Ashwini ji, can you switch on your camera? Namaskar, Ashwini ji, you can. You need to unmute. I think too many people sacrifice for you, so I can switch on my sim. But sir, your voice is not there, so you need to unmute. We've still not been able to.
We can't hear you, Dr. Mahajan.
Are you able to unmute? So it's showing green. I think there is some problem in your this thing. What you can do is you can put it on phone, and through my speaker it can be available. Sorry about this. I think this is some technical glitch. I'll dial you from landline, Ashwini ji. The voice is louder there. You can speak. Is he audible?
No, not as yet.
I think that it's not working. So let me dial from landline mobile only. I tried using Jugaad technology.
Can you hear me?
Is he audible?
Yes, now a little bit. Yes.
Ashwin ji, try to speak louder.
Yeah. So this Jugaad technology is working.
I hope so.
Okay. मैं ये निवेदन कर रहा था सभी माननीय पैनलिस्ट को हमने सुना सब जैसे विनीत जी ने कहा राणा जी ने कहा सब लोगों ने सबके बात हमें ध्यान में है कि किस प्रकार से डाटा की संरक्षणता जरूरी है। मैं इस बात से भी सहमत हूं कि बहुत प्रकार की कैपेबिलिटीज का निर्माण भी हमें करना होगा। चंद्रशेखर जी ने कहा कि जब तक हम कैपेबिलिटीज निर्माण नहीं कर पाए तो शायद ये संभव तो हम हमारे पास डाटा होने पर भी हम उसका उपयोग कर सकें। मैं अपनी बात शुरू करना चाहूंगा उस समय से जब राजीव जी का समय था, राजीव गांधी वो एक पोस्टल बिल लेकर के आए और पोस्टल बिल में प्रावधान ये था कि कोई भी किसी का भी पत्र खोल करके पढ़ सकता था और ये बात उस समय के राजनीतिक वातावरण था उसमें वो बात फिट नहीं हो रही थी कि कोई भी किसी की चिट्ठी कैसे खोल के पढ़ा। तो उस समय के जो हमारे राष्ट्रपति थे ज्ञानी जैल सिंह उन्होंने शायद ये भारत के संविधान में पहली बार हुआ उस प्रावधान का उपयोग राष्ट्रपति ने किया कि उस बिल को वापस कैबिनेट के पास भेज करके वापस पार्लियामेंट के पास न भेज करके उन्होंने उस बिल को समाप्त किया। 6 महीने गुजर गए तो वो बिल आज तक पारित नहीं हो पाया। वो तब तक कोई देख नहीं सकता था। आज हमारे व्हाट्सएप मैसेजेस हो, ईमेल हो, हमारे जूम पर आने वाली सारी बातचीत हो या कोई भी जो डेटा के रूप में किसी कंपनी के पास उपलब्ध है वो सब 15 पैसे में 20 पैसे में 1000 रुपए में 2000 रुपए में सब बिका और वो स्थिति में आज हम हैं। ऐसे में जो बहुत लंबे समय से स्वदेशी जागरण मंच के नाते भी इस विषय को हमने लिया है कि डेटा की संप्रभुता बहुत आवश्यक है और उसके लिए कैपेबिलिटीज का निर्माण करना भी उतना ही जरूरी है। यहाँ मैं आपको ये कितना महत्वपूर्ण है और किस प्रकार से लॉबीज, हम अगर इस प्रकार का कुछ प्रयास करेंगे उसके खिलाफ कितनी तेजी से काम करती है। मैं अभी मेरे को एक उदाहरण सामने आया, सेतु ऐप बनाई और उसका हेतु ये था कि सभी देशवासियों का, अधिकांश देशवासियों का डाटा मिल जाए, उसका उसको उनकी लोकेशन, जीपीएस और ब्लूटूथ के माध्यम से और अन्य चीजों को मिला करके वो कैसे लोगों की स्वास्थ्य की सुरक्षा की जाए। और मैं उन कंपनियों का नाम नहीं लेना चाहूंगा जिनके बिहार पर लोग काम कर रहे हैं, लेकिन आरोग्य सेतु ऐप के खिलाफ एक माहौल खड़ा करने की कोशिश हो रही है कि जो थोड़ा भी भारत सरकार वो भी किसी तरीके से न कर पाए। इसे अभी एक वक्त में आधार के 2010 में इस बिल को लेकर के आया था तो मैंने भी आधार का विरोध किया था, लेकिन आज के संदर्भ में जब सरकार ने सुनिश्चित कर दिया कि ये इस डाटा को बेचा नहीं जाएगा तो उसका सिस्टम का उपयोग अन्य प्रकार से हो सकता है, डाटा को बेचा नहीं जाएगा तो उस समय से और उसके कारण जो हमारे पास हमने देखा कि सब लोगों को डायरेक्ट बेनिफिट ट्रांसफर इस प्रकार की चीजें कर सकते हैं। तो सरकार द्वारा डाटा को कलेक्ट करना, उसका उपयोग करना देश हित में यह एक विषय है और इसलिए स्वाभाविक तौर पर हमें अगर इस विकल्प से हटकर कि कंपनियों द्वारा डेटा का इकट्ठा करना और उसका यूज और मिसयूज करना, हमने फेसबुक के संदर्भ में देखा है कि कैसे हमारे देश में लोकतंत्र को भी प्रभावित करने का प्रयास उन्होंने किया है। फिलहाल में एक डील हुई है फेसबुक और CIEU, उसके बारे में भी ये आ रही है कि इतना जबरदस्त मोनोपोलाइजेशन जिससे इसके आधार पर कोई कंपनियां मिल करके हमारे डेमोक्रेटिक सेटअप को भी तहस नहस करने की क्षमता है। एक्सरसाइज है कि हमें अधिकांश डाटा को अपने देश में स्टोर करना, अपने देश में उसकी कॉपी लेना और वो डाटा हमें खरीदना ना पड़े और उसका उपयोग तो हम लोग कर सके और उनके ऊपर एक प्रकार से अंकुश हो कंपनियों पर उस डाटा का वो उपयोग किस तरह से कर सकेंगे या नहीं कर पाएंगे। यहाँ एक जो विषय हमारे ध्यान में आता है कि इन कंपनियों के ऊपर अंकुश लगाने के लिए हमारे पास प्रावधान है, उसके लिए हमें राजनीतिक इच्छा शक्ति की जरूरत होगी। वर्तमान में एक स्थिति निर्माण हुई है क्योंकि आज जब हम कह रहे हैं न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर, तो न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर आफ्टर कोविड-19, चाइनीज वायरस के बाद का नया वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर, उसमें आप देख रहे होंगे आज से 2 महीने पहले तक सरकार का कोई मंत्री या सरकार का कोई घटक हम चीन को इन्वेस्टमेंट ये कोई बोल नहीं सकता। की ओर से बोला गया है कि जी जाने वाली तमाम इन्वेस्टमेंट को स्क्रूटनाइज करके उसका निर्णय लिया जाए। कोई एक हमारे मंत्री जी है जिन्होंने 5G का ट्रायल की थी और उसमें तमाम सारे वो बातें पहले से आ रही थी कि इस प्रकार से वो हमारी सुरक्षा के लिए सामरिक हितों के खिलाफ हो जाता है। वो मंत्री स्टेटमेंट दिया कि चीन से आने वाले सभी प्रकार के उपकरणों को सामयिक दृष्टि से कितना वो खतरनाक है उसके आधार पर आने की अनुमति दी जाए। सिनेरियो बन रहा है पूरी दुनिया में चीन के खिलाफ, उसका क्योंकि ये बात सही है कि जैसे विनीत जी ने कहा कि एक तरफ सांपनाथ और दूसरी तरफ नागनाथ, तो सांपनाथ को तो एक बार को टच किए हुए अभी सांपनाथ को एक बार टैकल करना और उसके बाद नागनाथ को देखना, क्योंकि हमने कोई रिटर्न में लिख कर नहीं देना है किसी को कि हमने फला देश को हमने इस प्रकार से टैकल किया और आपको हम इस प्रकार से टैकल करने वाले हैं, ये ऐसा कुछ बताने की आवश्यकता नहीं है। हमारे 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 अंदर अपनी इतनी क्षमता है। आज का राजनीतिक जो नेतृत्व है वो निर्णय लेने की क्षमता रखता है, लेकिन उसके अंदर एक राजनीतिक इच्छा शक्ति का होना और ये जो वर्तमान का जो संकट है वो उस इच्छा शक्ति को बढ़ावा दे रहा है। आज ये दिखाई दे रहा है। आज इसके साथ ही साथ मैं बार बार विनीत जी के साथ भी कई बार हमने कई पैनल डिस्कशंस में और कई मंचों पर ये बात कही है कि फेसबुक है, व्हाट्सएप है, गूगल है, माइक्रोसॉफ्ट, क्या जरूरत पड़ी हमें कि इनको हम बिना टैक्स के छोड़ दें? इन पर टैक्स लगाया जा सकता है और सरकार से जितनी बातचीत होती है हमारी सरकार में इस तरफ आगे बढ़ने की इच्छा भी है। और ये जितनी भी हम सोच रहे हैं कि आज तो हम इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर बनाना चाहते हैं हाउसिंग द डेटा पर यूज ऑफ डेटा ऑफ डेटा सारा संभव है। हम इन पर टैक्स लगा करके जितना धनराशि हमारी उस इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पर खर्च होनी है उससे कई गुना ज्यादा हम इन पर टैक्स लगा करके वसूल कर सकते हैं और अपने देश में कैपेबिलिटीज का निर्माण कर सकते हैं और उस डाटा का हम कमर्शियल यूटिलाइजेशन अपने देश के हितों के लिए भी कर सकते हैं, देश के हित के लिए, नागरिकों के हित के लिए, और इस प्रकार से हम एक बहुत बड़ी डाटा पावर बनने की स्थिति में आ सकते हैं। केवल और केवल एक ही चीज की जरूरत है, राजनीतिक इच्छा शक्ति, पॉलिटिकल विल पावर टू टैक्स दीज जायंट्स and we can do it. The whole world is talking about taxing these tax giants. We can also do it. We can do it in a better manner. जैसे OECD कर रहा है, जैसे यूरोपियन देश कुछ कोशिश कर रहे हैं, हमारे यहाँ इस पर बहुत इंटेंसिव चर्चा हो रही है और मुझे लगता है एक सेशन इस बात पर भी करें कि कैसे इन कंपनियों को टैक्स किया जा सकता है और उसके आधार पर उस राशि, उस आमदनी के आधार पर हम इस देश में एक बड़ा डाटा का निर्माण करें। इसी आशा के साथ मैं अपना वक्तव्य यहाँ समाप्त करता हूँ।
Thank you. Thank you, Ashwini ji. Thank you very much. I hope everybody was not able to hear him clearly. तो मैं बाद में इसकी recording जो है I'll send across. This was really enriching conversation which we had and stimulating also. It stimulated our minds. Probably, this should be the first of the discussions which we should do on this subject. And now, as and when the world is opening up and the fight for data would deepen, so we should be able to develop more consensus and more stimulate more minds that how India should get into creating an ecosystem so that our hardware as well as software generated from here, processed here, analyzed here, and we can also reap the benefits out of it. Our healthcare, which requires deeper understanding of our rural areas, they can get benefit out of it. Our our financial data could be processed so that our NBFCs and MFIs, they become more efficient. There is a huge requirement for our agriculture. We discussed today about the digital economy, but we all understand that even tractors and others, they also have IoTs, and they also gather a lot of data about our agriculture. And this will increase with the days. And we all understand that by the next 2 to 3 years, the the calculation in pre-COVID world was that our economy's 1/5 size would be of the digital economy. So data sovereignty becomes more relevant not only for our security, but also for making our businesses and country more robust. So I thank each and every one of you, Mr. Ranade, Lieutenant General Bhatia, Vineet, Mr. Chandrasekhar, Ms. Smita, even Ashwini ji. We couldn't hear him because of some technical glitch, but he still made an effort to make his points. So I'm really thankful to all of you. You have made our evenings great, and I also thank 75 odd audience which we had this evening. They spent time with us, and they heard us, and I'm sure the organizers would put to use this conversation which we had, so that it stimulates others' minds as well. I thank you really much. Thank you very much. And I really feel sorry because I see so many hands and so many questions in the chat room, but we can't ask those questions because of the lack of time. So I really feel sorry for from them. So and with the thanks and sorry, I conclude the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.